The day I found out where my rent checks had really gone, I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything or call her names. I just stood there, holding the glossy car brochure she'd accidentally left on the kitchen counter, and felt something inside me go terribly beautifully quiet. Because in that moment, the truth became louder than all her lectures, all her guilt trips, all her claims of being the responsible one. My mother-in-law, Evelyn, had been taking my rent money for 3 years, not to fix the house, not to help with maintenance like she'd said, but to buy herself a luxury car. A shiny, silver one with leather seats and a custom license plate that read, "Blessed." Funny, isn't it? How people like that always find a way to call theft a blessing. Before all this, before betrayal took the shape of a car key, I was just a young wife trying to make peace in a house that never truly felt like mine. My husband, Mark, and I had been married for 4 years when his parents offered us a small 2-bedroom home on their property. It was a cute little place, painted pale yellow with white shutters and a porch that creaked when you walked across it. Evelyn called it a family starter home. She said we could live there for a modest maintenance fee each month, just enough to cover upkeep and taxes. At the time, it sounded generous. We were still paying off Mark's student loans, and I was just getting my small design business off the ground. So when Evelyn said, "Honey, this will help you two save up for your future," I believed her. I wanted to believe her. Evelyn had always been particular. Her kitchen was spotless, her hair never out of place, her lipstick always the same coral shade she'd worn since 1982. She was the kind of woman who'd remind you to use coasters but call it guidance, not criticism. Mark adored her. He said she'd worked hard her whole life, raising 2 boys after her husband passed, running a small catering business from home. I respected that. I really did. But there was something about Evelyn that made me feel like I was constantly being graded on an invisible test. Every visit came with comments disguised as compliments. "You're doing your best, dear. It's just that my way keeps things a little neater. You cook well, though I never use that much oil. You're so creative. I wish I had the luxury of working from home, too." I'd laugh them off. Mark would squeeze my hand under the table, whispering, "Don't take it personally, she's just old-fashioned." And I'd smile, because that's what you do when you're trying to keep peace in a family. First things were, okay. Every month, I'd write Evelyn a check for $1,200, labeled house maintenance. She'd take it with a sweet smile and a "God bless you, sweetheart." Sometimes, she'd even drop by with homemade lasagna or lemon bars, saying, "Your rent helps me keep this place running smoothly for everyone." Felt fair, almost like we were helping each other. But then things began to shift. Evelyn started making offhand remarks about how expensive it is to own property, or how some people don't understand the real costs of adult life. At first, I thought she was venting, but soon her tone changed, sharper, more judgmental. She'd say things like, "You two really should learn how to manage money better. If you paid actual rent in the city, you'd see how good you have it here. Don't forget, it's our property. You're just staying there." It was subtle, but the message was clear. We were never to feel like the home was truly ours. Mark stayed neutral most of the time. He loved his mother, and confrontation wasn't in his nature. Whenever I'd mention how uncomfortable I felt, he'd sigh and say, "Babe, she's just trying to help. You know how she is." But it wasn't help anymore. It was control disguised as kindness. Still, I told myself it was temporary. We were saving up after all. Just a few more years, and we'd have enough for our own place. That dream kept me grounded, the thought of a small home where every wall, every piece of furniture belonged to us. Then, about 2 years in, I noticed something strange. One weekend, Evelyn came over to drop off some mail. When she parked in the driveway, I noticed a stack of envelopes on her passenger seat, all addressed to Harlan Properties. When I asked, she laughed and said, "Oh, just some business paperwork, dear. You wouldn't understand property management stuff." But it nagged at me. Harlan Properties? I didn't know she owned more than the main house. Later that night, while doing laundry, I told Mark what I'd seen. He shrugged. "Mom's probably just investing in something. You know she likes to keep busy." That was the thing about Mark. He trusted his mother blindly. And I loved that about him until it started to cost us. Over the next few months, I began to notice other small oddities. Our kitchen sink started leaking. And when I mentioned hiring a plumber, Evelyn said, "Oh no, dear. Just wait till next month. I'll use your rent for the repairs." But the repair never happened. Neither did the new paint job she promised for the porch, nor the upgraded water heater she claimed to be budgeting for. Every time I asked, she'd smile and say, "Things take time, sweetheart. Be patient." And I was, until patience started to feel like a polite word for being fooled. Then came the first real crack in the illusion. It was late one evening when Evelyn stopped by unexpectedly. She said she'd come to discuss finances. Her tone was unusually sharp. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one she'd helped us move in years ago. The air felt heavy, and I could hear the faint ticking of the clock above the stove. "Lisa," she began, folding her hands, "I've noticed you've been spending quite a bit lately, new curtains, a new rug. Do you really think that's wise given your situation?" I blinked. "My situation?" "Yes," she said, tilting her head. "You're living in our property. I just don't want you to get too comfortable." Her words cut deeper than I expected. Too comfortable. Like I was some ungrateful tenant instead of her son's wife. I nodded politely, but that night I cried in the shower quietly so Mark wouldn't hear. Because for the first time I realized she didn't see me as family, just as a convenient income stream. And still I kept paying. Month after month, check after check. Because confronting her felt like breaking something sacred. Because I wanted peace more than pride. But peace, I'd soon learn, always comes with a price. I can still remember the exact morning things began to shift. The moment the seed of doubt quietly took root. It was a humid Saturday in June. The kind of morning where the air feels thick before the sun even rises. Mark had left early for work, and I was in the kitchen flipping pancakes when Evelyn walked in through the back door like she owned the place. She didn't even knock anymore. She smiled her usual smile, tight, polite, like it had been ironed into her face. "Morning, sweetheart," she said, setting a folder on the counter. "Just dropping off the new maintenance budget. You know, for transparency." Her tone was light, but her eyes watched me carefully. I nodded, trying to sound casual. "Oh, that's great. I've been meaning to ask how the house funds are being used." For a split second, something flickered in her expression. Annoyance, maybe, before she smoothed it over. "It's all very routine, dear. Taxes, paint, repairs. Nothing too interesting." She gathered her purse and left almost immediately. The pancakes burned, but I didn't notice. I just stood there, staring at that manila folder on my counter. When I finally opened it, my stomach dropped. Inside were typed spreadsheets, line after line of expenses. But none of them made sense. There were vague entries like maintenance work, $2,000, roof evaluation, $800, structural consulting, $1,400. There were no receipts, no names, no invoices, just the numbers. And at the very bottom, a handwritten note. "Next month, adjusting rent due to increased costs." I felt my chest tighten. Increased costs? The house hadn't been touched in months. The same leaky sink, the same peeling paint, the same creaky porch steps she kept promising to fix. That night, I showed the folder to Mark. He looked at it, frowning. "Yeah, it's weird. But I'm sure Mom's just simplifying things. You know, she keeps everything organized her own way." "Organized?" I said softly. "There's not a single receipt here, Mark." He sighed. "Lisa, don't start. You know how she gets when she feels questioned. I'll talk to her, okay?" But he never did. And I never pressed. Because in families like ours, silence was the easiest way to keep the peace. Weeks passed, and little things began to stand out like splinters under skin. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen to find Evelyn chatting on the phone near the window. She didn't see me at first. Her tone was light, almost giddy, a version of her I rarely heard. Yes, the deposit cleared," she said. "No, not the catering one, the rental income. I told you it's reliable. They always pay on time." My breath caught. Rental income? Before I could step back, she turned, startled to see me standing there. Her hand flew to her chest, then she laughed a little too quickly. "Oh goodness. You scared me, sweetheart. Just talking to the bank. They're asking about my old accounts again." I smiled, pretending I believed her. But something inside me began to stir. Something sharper than doubt. That night, lying beside Mark, I stared at the ceiling and thought about every maintenance check I'd written. Every month that money disappeared into her hands without a single repair to show for it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. A few days later, while organizing bills, I noticed an old email from our insurance company. It was addressed to Harlan Rentals LLC. I frowned. We'd never registered under that name. Curiosity, or maybe intuition, led me to search the name online. And there it was. Harlan Rentals LLC owner, Evelyn Harlan. The same woman who insisted we were paying house maintenance fees was running an entire rental business, under a name we'd never even heard before. The listings showed multiple properties in her name. One of them was our address. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. She wasn't just collecting checks for maintenance. She was reporting us as tenants in her business portfolio, earning tax benefits, collecting our payments as official rent, and calling herself a landlord. That night, when I confronted Mark, his face went pale. "Lisa, you're saying my mom's treating us like tenants?" "I'm saying she's been profiting off us, Mark. Look, it's public record." He scrolled through the listings in silence. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed soft. "I'll talk to her. Maybe there's a misunderstanding." I laughed bitterly. A misunderstanding doesn't last 3 years. He didn't argue. He just closed the laptop and sat there in silence, staring into the dark. The next morning, Evelyn came over, unannounced as usual, holding a basket of muffins. "I thought I'd drop these off," she chirped. "Blueberry, your favorite." I could barely look at her. My chest felt tight, my throat raw. I wanted to scream, to throw the basket across the room and shout, "You stole from us." But instead, I smiled politely and took the muffins. Because that's what I'd been trained to do. Stay composed, stay kind, stay small. When she left, I closed the door and leaned against it, trembling. That's when I knew. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about control. Evelyn didn't just want rent. She wanted power. She wanted me to depend on her, to always feel like a guest in my own home. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't going to be her polite, obedient tenant anymore. I was going to find out exactly where every dollar had gone. And I wasn't going to stop until I did. The first clue came from the unlikeliest place, the mailbox. One morning, I noticed a glossy envelope tucked between our bills, addressed to Evelyn. I wasn't in the habit of opening her mail, but curiosity got the better of me when I saw the logo. Silverline Motors. Inside was a letter confirming the final payment on a new Mercedes-Benz GLC. The purchase date. Exactly 3 years after we'd started paying her maintenance fees. I remember sitting at the table, holding that letter with shaking hands. 3 years of rent checks. 3 years of trust. All turned into a car she'd bought for herself. That was the moment I stopped being scared and started planning. I used to believe betrayal came in thunder, in screaming, slamming doors, and shattered glass. But when Evelyn's betrayal finally revealed itself, it came quietly, like a knife slipped between ribs. It was late August when I decided to dig deeper. Mark had grown distant, too quiet, and every time I mentioned his mother, he changed the subject. I couldn't tell if he was protecting her, or himself. One night after he'd gone to bed, I opened my laptop and logged into our joint bank account. There it was again. Every month, a transfer labeled Property to Harlan. I clicked the details. The destination account was Harlan Rentals LLC. My stomach dropped. I copied the account number and searched it online. Within minutes, a trail of transactions appeared. Some public, some hidden behind paywalls, but enough to piece together the truth. Over the past 3 years, Evelyn had collected over $78,000 from us. And none of it had gone toward the house. Every penny had been rerouted into her personal account, used to buy jewelry, vacations, and that Mercedes I'd seen in the letter. She had stolen from her own son. From her own family. I sat there in the dark, numb. How do you even begin to process that kind of betrayal? The next morning, I decided to confront her. Not with shouting, not with emotion, but with facts. I drove to her house just after sunrise. The air was heavy with dew, and the quiet of her suburban street felt almost staged, like a set before the actors arrive. She answered the door in her robe, surprised to see me. "Lisa, is everything all right, dear?" I held up a folder, thick, organized, full of evidence. I think it's time we talk about the house. Her smile faltered. She stepped aside, gesturing me in. We sat at her polished kitchen table, the same one she used to lecture me about financial responsibility. Now it was my turn. I laid out every document, the spreadsheets, the bank transfers, the fake expense lists. She didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there, lips pressed tightly together. Evelyn, I said softly, I know what you've been doing. You've been using our payments for yourself. You've been listing our home as one of your rental properties. I found the registration. Her silence cracked like thin glass. She exhaled long and slow. I had to, she finally whispered. You wouldn't understand. Wouldn't understand what? That you lied to us. She looked up then, eyes wet but hard. That house was mine long before it was yours. Your husband was drowning in debt when you moved in. I kept this family afloat. You think those rent checks were theft? They were repayment. I blinked. Repayment? We paid for everything. The bills, the groceries. Because you wanted to feel independent. She snapped. But you weren't. You were living under my roof, using my name and pretending it was yours. I just made it official. Her words hit like a slap. So that makes it right? To steal from your own son. Steal? She laughed bitterly. No, darling. I secured my investment. You think love means handing over everything? No, Lisa. Love has boundaries. You should learn that. I stood up, shaking. I think I just did. And then I left. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry until I was halfway home. That night, I told Mark everything. Every word of what she'd said. He just sat there, staring at the floor. She's not lying about the debt, he murmured. Back then, we were behind on the mortgage. She helped us out. Helping us doesn't mean owning us. I shouted. She took advantage of that. She's been controlling us with guilt and money for years. He rubbed his temples, his voice trembling. I know. But she's my mother, Lisa. What am I supposed to do? Cut her off? Yes, I said quietly. If you ever want this to be our life again. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. For the first time, I saw the divide between us, not just husband and wife, but son and mother. And Evelyn was standing right in the middle. Weeks passed. Mark avoided calls from his mother. Evelyn stopped visiting. The air in our home was heavy but still, like a storm that had already passed, leaving only debris behind. Until one evening a letter arrived. It wasn't handwritten. It was formal, printed, stamped with a law firm's name. Notice of eviction. Effective in 30 days. Signed by Evelyn Harlan, property owner. I remember the sound I made when I read it. Something between a laugh and a sob. Mark grabbed the letter, scanning it in disbelief. She wouldn't, he whispered. But she would. And she did. She'd filed paperwork claiming we were tenants who'd failed to pay rent on time. The same rent she'd been siphoning for years. Mark called her, his voice shaking with rage. Mom, how could you do this? All she said was, you wanted independence. Consider this your first real test. Then she hung up. That night, we packed boxes in silence. Every sound, tape tearing, drawers closing, felt like an echo of everything we'd lost. When I carried the last box out to the car, I turned back and looked at the porch light. The same one Evelyn insisted on upgrading years ago and charged us $600 for. I almost laughed. She hadn't just stolen our money. She'd stolen our peace. But as I watched that light fade behind us, I realized something I hadn't before. You can lose your home, your comfort, even your trust. But you can still keep your dignity. And I wasn't going to let her take that, too. There's a kind of silence that settles over you after betrayal. Not empty, but sharp. It hums beneath your skin like electricity, pushing you forward when grief would rather keep you still. That's how I felt the morning we left the house Evelyn had evicted us from. Mark drove in silence. Our son, Caleb, slept in the back seat, unaware of the war that had unfolded inside his family. I stared out the window at the passing streets, all the familiar corners of a life we no longer belonged to. I wasn't angry anymore. I was determined. Evelyn thought she'd won, that she'd humiliated me, forced me to crawl back to her. But she didn't realize something. When a woman has nothing left to lose, she becomes unstoppable. We moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It smelled faintly of old paint and lemons, and the water pressure was terrible, but it was ours. No more fake maintenance fees. No more hidden control. For the first few weeks, Mark was distant. I could see the guilt weighing on him. He still called his mother occasionally, hoping for reconciliation. Each time she'd remind him of what we owed her. Emotionally, financially, morally. But I didn't need reconciliation. I needed truth. So I started documenting everything. Every canceled check. Every transfer. Every invoice she'd sent us. I built a timeline. 3 years of transactions totaling nearly $80,000. All tied directly to her personal accounts. But what I found next made my hands shake. Through a public property record search, I discovered Evelyn wasn't just renting out our home. She owned 3 other houses in her name, all purchased within the same period she'd been collecting our payments. She hadn't just stolen from us. She'd built a small empire off the backs of her own family. That was when I decided, this time she wouldn't get away with it quietly. It started with a conversation I'll never forget. Mark was sitting at the kitchen table, head in his hands, bills spread out in front of him. "Lisa," he said, voice heavy, "I can't fight her. She's my mother. She's all I have. And what am I?" I asked softly. He looked up at me, eyes tired and full of conflict. "You're everything. But she's family too." I took a deep breath. Then maybe it's time she learned what family really means. He didn't stop me when I picked up the phone. I started with the homeowners association. I explained everything, the false invoices, the fake maintenance fees, the illegal eviction notice. Then I contacted a tenants' rights lawyer, a calm, methodical woman named Carla, who listened to my story without flinching. When I showed her the evidence, she looked at me and said, "You know, this isn't just unethical. It's fraud." We filed a formal complaint and began preparing a case. But I wasn't finished. I knew Evelyn cared more about her image than anything, her spotless reputation as the pillar of the community. So I found a way to make the truth impossible to ignore. At the next neighborhood board meeting, one Evelyn had chaired for over a decade, I stood up during the open comment section. My hands trembled, but my voice did not. "My name is Lisa Harlan," I began, "and I've recently learned that the property I was living in was being fraudulently managed by a member of this very board." Every head turned. Evelyn froze in her seat across the room. For 3 years, I paid over $2,000 a month in maintenance fees. I have the receipts, the transfers, the proof, all of which show those funds went directly into her personal account. Gasps filled the room. Evelyn tried to interrupt, her face turning pale. "That's a lie. You can't prove." I held up the folder. "I can. And I already have. This is being submitted to our lawyer and the HOA today." The room buzzed with whispers. Evelyn's carefully built persona, the generous mother, the trusted neighbor, began to crumble right there under the fluorescent lights. "You talk about family values," I said quietly, looking straight at her. "But what kind of mother steals from her own son?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. By the time we left that meeting, Evelyn's world had started to collapse. Neighbors stopped waving at her. Rumors spread faster than wildfire. And within a week, the HOA had suspended her position pending investigation. But it wasn't about humiliation for me. It was about justice. About showing her that manipulation disguised as love is still manipulation. When the legal notice finally arrived a month later, confirming the fraud charges and ordering restitution, I didn't celebrate. I just sat there in silence, holding Mark's hand. He was crying. "I didn't want it to come to this," he said. "She's my mom." "I know," I whispered. "But sometimes the people we love the most are the ones we have to stop protecting." 2 months later, we bought a small home of our own. Nothing fancy. Chipped paint, creaky floors, a backyard that needed work, but every corner was ours. No rent checks. No hidden control. No fear. Sometimes, late at night, I'd catch Mark scrolling through old photos of his mother and Caleb together. I never told him to stop. Grief is love with nowhere to go, and I knew he had to carry that in his own way. But me? I'd already laid mine down. Because forgiveness, I realized, isn't about pretending it never happened. It's about refusing to let it define you. When the storm finally broke, it wasn't loud. It didn't come in the form of slammed doors or shouting matches. It came quietly, through the way people began to look at Evelyn differently. She used to be the kind of woman who everyone admired. At church, she'd hand out baked pies and volunteer for every event. People trusted her. They saw her as generous, wise, dependable. But when the HOA investigation results went public, all that changed. Her generosity now looked suspicious. Her authority self-serving. The same people who once praised her now whispered behind her back. Evelyn stopped showing up to Sunday service. Stopped answering the door. Even the neighbors who had known her for 20 years started crossing the street when they saw her coming. And in the middle of all that silence, she called me. It was a Thursday evening. Caleb was doing homework at the table, the smell of spaghetti filling the air. My phone buzzed, her name glowing on the screen. For a long moment, I just stared at it. Then slowly I answered. Lisa. Her voice was weak. I need to see you. There was something in her tone, not manipulation this time, not control, but exhaustion. Still, I kept my voice steady. Why? I asked. Because, she paused and I heard her breath catch. Because I can't fix this unless you understand. I hesitated, then finally said, tomorrow, noon. The next day, I met her at the old house, the one we'd once called home. She opened the door slowly, her face pale, eyes sunken from sleepless nights. The house looked smaller somehow, stripped of its warmth. She gestured for me to sit, then lowered herself onto the couch across from me. Her hand shook as she poured tea. You destroyed my life, she began, voice trembling. I looked her in the eye. No, Evelyn. You did that yourself. She winced, but she didn't argue. Do you know why I started collecting that money? She asked after a long silence. I didn't respond. I wanted to hear it from her. After my husband died, everything felt unstable. Mark was barely holding his job together and you wanted to make your own way. I was terrified you'd both end up losing everything. So I started saving what you gave me. I thought maybe someday if you needed help, I'd have something to offer. She looked up, her eyes watery. But somewhere along the way, I started feeling entitled. Like I deserved it for all I'd done for this family. So when I saw that car, I told myself it wasn't stealing, it was repayment. Her voice broke then. The mask she'd worn for years, the control, the superiority, crumbled before my eyes. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. I didn't know how to stop. I sat quietly for a long time. Part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to cry. But mostly I just felt tired. You didn't just take our money, Evelyn, I said softly. You took our trust. You made me feel small in a home that was supposed to be safe. She nodded, tears slipping down her face. I know, she said. And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I had to tell you the truth. For the first time, I believed her. A few weeks later, the court ordered Evelyn to repay part of the stolen funds through asset liquidation. She sold one of her rental homes. Not the car, of course. She couldn't bring herself to part with it. But the day I saw her driving that shiny vehicle again, something inside me shifted, because it didn't look like a trophy anymore. It looked like a burden. A symbol of everything she'd lost trying to hold power she didn't need. Months passed. The legal process ended, and life began to quiet down. Mark started seeing his mother again, cautiously, like approaching an injured animal. First I stayed away. But when he asked if we could invite her over for Caleb's 8th birthday, I hesitated only a moment before agreeing. She came bearing gifts. Too many as always, but this time her eyes stayed downcast. She didn't take over the kitchen. She didn't criticize the decorations. She just helped. Quietly. At one point, as Caleb blew out his candles, I glanced at her. She was smiling, a fragile, bittersweet kind of smile. And in that moment, I realized something. Maybe she would never fully make it right. Maybe the damage would always linger, soft and invisible like a bruise. But I could choose what came next. That night, after everyone left, I stood at the window watching her taillights fade down the road. Mark came up behind me and slipped his arms around my waist. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For not giving up on me. Or her. I turned to face him. We can't choose what people do to us, Mark. But we can choose what we carry after. He nodded, pressing his forehead against mine. Outside the night was still. Peaceful. It had taken years, lies, humiliation, heartbreak, but somehow we'd made it to this quiet place. Not perfect, but whole. And maybe that was enough. I didn't realize how tightly I'd been holding my breath until peace finally started to find its way back into our lives. For months after Evelyn's betrayal, I moved through each day like someone learning to walk again. Cautious, slow, unsure of my footing. Every decision, every conversation felt fragile. But healing, I've learned, doesn't come with a single apology or court ruling. It comes in the quiet choices we make after the storm. Some mornings I'd wake early, sit at the kitchen table with my coffee, and watch the sun filter through the curtains. The same table where Evelyn once stood counting maintenance checks with that practiced smile. Now it was just mine again. Sometimes Mark would join me, his hair still messy from sleep. He'd pour himself a cup and sit across from me without saying a word. That silence, once heavy with resentment, had softened. We talked more now. Really talked. About money. About boundaries. About trust. It wasn't easy, but honesty never is. One Saturday afternoon, months after everything, we were in the garden planting hydrangeas. The air smelled of earth and new beginnings. Mark had his sleeves rolled up, sweat glistening on his forehead. "You know," he said, gently pressing a sapling into the soil, "Mom called me last night." I paused, the trowel frozen in my hand. "Oh." She asked how Caleb's doing. Said she misses him. I looked at him, wary. "And what did you say?" He smiled faintly. "I told her he misses her too." There was a long silence between us. The sound of birds, the wind through the leaves. Then he added softly, "She's trying, Lisa. In her own way." I sighed. "Trying doesn't erase what she did." "No," he said, meeting my eyes. "But maybe it's where we start." His words stayed with me for days. As deep down I knew he was right. Forgiveness isn't a favor you give someone else. It's freedom you give yourself. So one Sunday I found myself driving toward Evelyn's house. It felt strange, the same path I'd driven hundreds of times before, now heavy with memory. When I reached her driveway, that silver car still gleamed beneath the afternoon light, as beautiful and bitter as ever. She opened the door before I could knock. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Lisa." I managed a small smile. "I didn't come to fight." For a moment she didn't move. Then she stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. The house smelled of lemon polish and wilted flowers. She'd always kept things tidy, as if order could make up for the chaos underneath. We sat across from each other in the living room. The silence between us wasn't hostile this time, just quiet, tentative. "I've been thinking," I began slowly, "about everything. About us." She folded her hands tightly. "And you hurt me, Evelyn. You humiliated me in front of people I respected. You took what wasn't yours." But I took a breath. "I don't want to carry this anger forever. I want to move on." Her lips trembled. "You mean you forgive me?" "I mean I'm letting go," I said softly. "Not for you, for me. For my family." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You always were the stronger one," she whispered. "No," I replied. "I just finally learned where my strength comes from." That evening when I got home, Caleb was waiting on the porch steps. "Grandma called," he said. "She told me she's sorry." I knelt down, brushing the hair from his forehead. "And what did you say?" He shrugged. "I told her I still love her." Something inside me melted then, because children, in their innocence, often understand forgiveness long before we do. Over the next year, things began to settle into something resembling normal. Evelyn would visit occasionally, always respectful, always quiet. She no longer tried to control our lives. Sometimes she'd just sit in the yard with Caleb, watching him play. Once I caught her staring at me with a look I couldn't quite name. Regret, maybe. Gratitude, perhaps both. She never spoke about the car again. But one day, she pulled into our driveway in an old sedan instead of that shiny luxury one. When I looked closer, I noticed her wrists were bare. No gold bracelet, no diamond watch. She must have sold it. She didn't say why. And I didn't ask. Some things, I think, are understood without words. Life has a way of humbling us. It strips away illusions, pride, and possessions, until all that's left is truth. Evelyn's truth was that her need for control came from fear. Fear of losing relevance, of aging, of being forgotten. Mine was that I'd spent years seeking her approval when all I needed was my own self-respect. And Mark, he learned that peace in a family doesn't come from keeping everyone happy. Comes from protecting what's right. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Mark and I sat on the porch while Caleb chased fireflies in the yard. "You ever think about how far we've come?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Every day." He took my hand, fingers warm against mine. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You could have let this destroy us." I looked out at the fading light. It almost did. But sometimes you have to lose everything you thought was secure to see what really matters. And as the night settled in soft, calm, and golden, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. I was free.